One of the first things I want to show you is the Tower of Babel Stele.
All right, let's see it. And the fit for this video is Johns Hopkins University.
But this is an incredible archaeological find. It's got the Tower of Babylon here. I don't know if you can see it. It looks like a ziggurat structure, and it's got Nebuchadnezzar on here, and it's got an inscription. And it basically says that this is Nebuchadnezzar standing by this old dilapidated tower here. It was even in his day, it still existed. And there he was posing with it. That's pretty fascinating if you think about it.
So this stele likely depicts the ziggurat that was the inspiration for the story of the Tower of Babel from Genesis 11. However, it is not support for the historicity of this story. If anything, it throws more weight behind the theory that this story was composed in the middle of the 7th century BCE as a means of thumbing the nose at the Neo-Assyrian Empire. And we'll get to that, but first I want to talk a little bit about this stele. There's a really good open access article from less than a year ago in the journal Iraq right here that will share a lot of details about this stele. Now here's an aerial photograph that shows with the red dot where this stele seems to have been found. The green dots below outline the floor plan of the temple of Esagil of Marduk, and to the north you see some concentric squares and what look like ponds. That is likely the remains of the ziggurat of Et-Menanke, and that is likely the ziggurat depicted on the stele. Now here's a translation of the text that is on that stele from the artifacts profile in the Skoyan collection. And as you can see, there are two different ziggurats that are mentioned. One is the ziggurat of Et-Menanke, which is shown in that photograph, which was nearby where the stele was discovered. The other is the ziggurat of Eorme-Menanke, which comes from a place called Borsippa, which is a bit further away from where this stele was discovered. Now the ziggurat of Et-Menanke was likely constructed probably around the beginning of the 2nd millennium BCE, perhaps during or close to the reign of Hammurabi. Now when the Neo-Assyrian Empire came into Babylon at the beginning of the 7th century BCE, the king Sennacherib destroyed and dismantled a large chunk of this ziggurat, and it remained in a state of disrepair for several decades until the Neo-Babylonian Empire conquered the Neo-Assyrian Empire, and the first king of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, Nabopolassar, began a restoration project on the ziggurat. And his son, Nebuchadnezzar II, is the one who took credit for finishing the reconstruction of the Tower of Et-Menanke. Most scholars today would suggest that the context for the development of the tradition of the Tower of Babel were those several decades where it was left unfinished, and the story is probably using that unfinished ziggurat as inspiration for this notion that God confused everyone's languages and they had to leave the tower unfinished. So it's kind of thumbing the nose, like I said, at the Neo-Assyrian Empire for leaving the ziggurat unfinished until Nebuchadnezzar II and his dad Nabopolassar would come through and repair it. So this is not evidence of the historicity of the story of the Tower of Babel. If anything, it is evidence of the 7th century creation of the story of the Tower of Babel from Genesis 11.
Dan did a great job, but did you catch the political bullshit that was in that video? The first political bullshit in that video is the fact that it is actually called the Tower of Babel Stele. This stele has absolutely nothing to do with the Genesis version of the story of the ziggurats in Babylon. If anything, it should be called the Stele of Nebuchadnezzar getting the damn job done, and to hell with you Assyrians. That would be a better, I know they're not going to give it a whole name like that, but it should be called the Nebuchadnezzar Ziggurat Stele, but not the Tower of Babel Stele, because for the Babylonians, as Dan so eloquently put it, this was really more the Babylonians thumbing up their nose at the Neo-Assyrians for them being able to accomplish a task that the Assyrians weren't able to do, and the Babylonians were able to finish it. And it's kind of like a trophy thing, which we know countries have a tendency to do that. The second travesty within that video is that the people who were sitting in the congregation of that pastor were just going to accept that this must be referencing the Genesis story. That's why it's called the Tower of Babel Stele, because it already presets your mind that you are going to automatically relay it to and validate your Abrahamic religions. So these people are sitting there and they're not going to dig deep. They're not going to look at what this man is saying and say, okay, it's a stele, got Nebuchadnezzar standing next to a ziggurat that is complete. But in the story of Genesis, Nebuchadnezzar is far removed from the time frame that the Tower of Babel was supposedly have been done. Matter of fact, it doesn't even talk about who was the leader at the time. And it could not have even been Nebuchadnezzar at that time frame because languages had already been changed or spread out according to your story. So you see how Nebuchadnezzar standing next to the ziggurat doesn't make sense for the Abrahamic religion for them to call that the Tower of Babel, Stele. But he doesn't want his people sitting in the audience to start making that logical conclusion that if A plus B can't equal C, they don't want that. They want the math to not math. Okay, they want the math to not math, and that math ain't mathing to that with that congregation. It shouldn't be mathing, but they don't want you to figure out the math. They want you to sit up there and just take what they say and walk with it, run with it, and so you can still be stupid with it. That's what they want. But that's not what we do. We break it down. We look at it. We say that the time frames don't fit. It should not be called that. That it had absolutely nothing to do with that. It does not validate this Babylonian, this Christian story about the Tower of Babel. And it's so stupid. Babylon means gateway of the gods. It had nothing to do with languages. Just that in itself. So this is why we do what we do. This is why we free ourselves to be ourselves. Because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibrations.